Good evening. Good to see you all again, and welcome back. So this is the second class of week 2, and I'll cover chapter 1 from your textbook, Organizational Development and Reinventing the Organization. But first, go back to that psychological contract activity that we did on the first day of class. Remember, we sort of talked about what each other's expectations of each other were and tried to articulate them. And I took a photograph of the board and what we had. So you wanted me to teach you sort of management skills to the best of my ability as an academic, to give some personal insights. And I said that I'll try to be clear when it's opinion or something that comes from a very limited perspective, and then I'll bring in a practitioner. You wanted to have a meaningful learning experience that wasn't all about jumping through the hoops and testing. Actually, I was thinking about that today because I was going to teach something. I was thinking about how am I going to test this? And I thought, what if I didn't test it? That was a big thought. Welcome. You wanted me to sort of be on your team, be supportive, to help you create positive organizational cultures. We'll definitely talk about what that means, and to respect your boundaries. Then we talked about what expectations you might have for each other. And so it said that you wanted each other to be active in discussion, to have reviewed the assigned materials, try to create respectful and inclusive spaces for you, to communicate effectively, and respect diverse perspectives. And then you asked me what kind of expectations I might have for you, and I said that I hope that you show integrity and be engaged and show me that you care about each other. Now, after class, I asked you guys to kind of write up a summary of that on Brightspace. And so I went back and looked at them. And I think it's important to do this because psychological contracts are informal and shifty. And they change over time, and they keep shifting, even after you've maybe clarified something. So one thing I noticed was that all summaries were partial. Right? There was no summary that captured all of that. And that's sort of okay, and that's normal. Most of the summaries took a sort of a personal, local perspective. So you told me about what you wanted, kind of what you heard, or maybe if you're in a group, you told me about what your group said specifically. But I was generally not seeing a class level perspective. Some new material popped up that either wasn't there before, or if it was, I didn't catch that, okay? Because I also misunderstand things. So what did I notice? Communicate more with students and reduce misunderstandings about course materials and assignments. That's great, I would like to do that. I don't remember that before. That could be, maybe I missed that, or maybe it's new. If there's a day when I can't be in class and it's canceled, the earlier it's communicated, the better. That's new. I also agree to that. Sure, I commit to doing that. As soon as I know that a class is canceled, I will let you know. I don't plan to do that, by the way. I get 2 sick days. But then what would probably happen is that the department chair would come in and teach. You'd like me to reduce misconceptions about organizational management. I think that's new. I'd love to do some myth busting. I'm happy to sign up for that. One person would like me to talk about organizational citizenship behavior and reducing counterproductive workplace behavior. And yes, I'll certainly talk about those. I don't think they're in your textbook. For your expectations for each other, what I had seen before is that you wanted each other to have reviewed the material, but now to be honest about it in group work if you sort of haven't done it and still do your best. I think that actually happened in our last class was pretty bad. There were a couple of people that hadn't done the readings, but that they were good sports, right? And they did what they could. So I saw that happen, and I thought that was nice. But it's also new. There were some potential for miscommunication or misunderstandings. So this was a psychological contract activity. Things like providing accommodations, extra time for quizzes, flexibility around deadlines are a matter of syllabus policy, and they're written in the syllabus. I think I do give you a lot of flexibility. I think that's there, but that's a syllabus thing, not a psychological contract thing. And I read this. As someone who has spent time as a manager, I'd like to hear more of the academic side of how to be a proper manager. When I read that for the first time, I thought the person was saying that me, as somebody who has spent time as a manager, could talk about that. And I thought, but I thought I told them that I'm an academic, not a manager. And then I realized the person might have meant that they had been a manager and they want to hear about the academic stuff. And maybe that was what really happened. But there was a while that I was sitting there, I was like, no, like they weren't listening when I said I'm an academic. So do you see my potential to misread things? Then there was another one that I misread and it said no silly questions. So I thought, okay, this person wants me to make sure that I police questions for silliness. You're not allowed to ask silly questions. And then it sort of dawned on me that what that might have meant was there are no silly questions. To sort of take all questions seriously and respectfully. And I figured that's probably what the person meant. But the first time I read it, I misunderstood it. If I'm right that I misunderstood. I don't know that I did. You'd have to tell me. And then there was one that I didn't understand. There was one point that said questioning value of degree. I don't know what that meant. Does anyone know what that meant? No one?
I think it was sort of the idea of when you do a university degree, the expectations of its value when you're done are not necessarily clear. You hear about a lot of people having difficulty finding employment.
Ah, okay.
So the having some clear picture, of course, barring individual responsibility in their own career decisions, because that's another whole conversation. But to whatever extent is possible, having a clear expectation of what a course value is in the real world.
Okay, so if I'm hearing this correctly,
and
I'm repeating this back, because as you know, you can't hear when you're on Zoom,
yep.
And you can tell me if I didn't hear you correctly. You want to know what about this class is applicable or valuable in the real world.
Yeah.
Did I get that, or did I just sort of go off somewhere else?
Nope, absolutely you got that, I think.
Okay, good, all right. I think it is true that sometimes, as part of their own promotion, universities and academics will oversell the value of a course or oversell the value of the degree to kind of support your sense of perceived employability. So you might hear people saying, wow, these are all these things you can do with a psychology degree. But then in reality, there's a negative return on investment. Studies have found a negative return on investment. And you might find that you've got your psychology degree and you're looking at jobs working in a group home and people with no degree are doing that. You might find that you have to go get a master's degree. Is that what you mean? Kind of being...
You're definitely, yeah, sure, yeah. This wasn't my thing, it was a group discussion.
All right, yeah, so it's interesting.
It wasn't really my comment.
And so I'm hearing you say that was not your comment, it was you were representing the group, it was someone else's comment. You can see the opportunity for misunderstanding because that person said something, you summarized it, and then now I'm hearing it and I'm interpreting it. It's that kind of game of, when I was a kid we called it Chinese telephone, but I don't know if that's inappropriate now. Whatever you call that game.
Poor communication.
Yes. Okay. And now my clicker is working. So what we did there with the psychological contract activity was a bit like a focus group. Right? I gave you some kind of question, you talked about it, and then you gave me a summary of that. But we can ask questions like, how are the individual contributions represented? Just like we did in that little exchange there. So when one person speaks for a group, are you representing everything that everyone said democratically? Did you leave some things out? Did you misunderstand some things? Do you see how the opportunity for error works in? And then once, let's say, somebody's collecting and analyzing this data, well, what's the transparency on the qualitative analysis there? There are procedures for qualitative analysis, how you look at a bunch of written data and pull the themes out, but more often than not, we're like, well, these are the 3 things people said, most of all. And how do you know that's true? Like, what if I wanted to run this class a certain way, so you said, you all wanted a didactic teaching style. How would you know if I did that? And very often when you see a consultation in a workplace, there'll be some dialogue, people will have conversations, they'll send in their feedback, and then what? How does that get analyzed? Who's doing the analysis? Are they putting any of their own biases into it. And they, as humans, they will. That'll happen. And then where does the report go? And what happens? And do you get to see it? Do you get to say, no, that's not what we said? Do you ever have the opportunity to do that? So in human communication, misunderstanding is normal. Okay? Just because you say something and tape it and put it in writing doesn't mean that it got through the way you wanted to get it through. Maybe you weren't being clear. Sometimes it isn't that we miscommunicated or communicated ambiguously. Sometimes we're actually a little confused or making it up as we go along. So I expected that I was going to see a class level summary of the activity, but is that what I asked you to do? What did I actually ask you to do?
To summarize our answers.
Yeah, summarize something. And what was that, right? Like how specific and how clear was I in what I actually asked for?
Not very.
Yeah, it's much less than perfect. We sort of often assume that we're doing everything properly and that other people are doing everything properly.
Also, I posted
Yes.
mine under the suggestion discussion post where you were like, I'm open to any suggestions instead of the actual.
Oh, okay, so your response is
that's why
somewhere.
you didn't see.
Okay, no, I haven't seen that. Okay, thank you for letting me know. And
But
I'll
I
go
just
read it.
posted underneath the right discussion post.
Okay. Thank you. So it's there now. Great. Super.
I'm notoriously poor at following directions.
Okay.
What I got from you was that all we had to do was prove that we were here and we were engaged.
So what I'm hearing you say is that all I actually said is just for, show me that you were there, you were engaged, you cared. And I do remember saying something like that, but I kind of meant that more for grading. Like, I don't want it graded harshly. Right? Student was awake and cared is pretty good. But I see how what you're saying is that that's not the same thing as like the task direction.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's on you. I think I was probably unclear or making it up as I went along or didn't really know what I was doing.
I have a learning disability and attention deficit disorder, developmental disorder. So directions for me, like when I hear you say enthusiastically what the directions are verbally, I'm following that. And I probably didn't look at the actual things. We didn't take the time to read the actual instructions, so that's on me.
So what I'm getting from your comment, which nobody on Zoom heard, was that you have let's say a learning disability or intentional disability, and that just makes it all harder.
Yeah.
So maybe I could be clear, and that's still hard for you. And if I'm unclear, well then that's like we're squared.
Yep.
Super. Okay. So sometimes,
No pressure.
So sometimes it's in our interests as the manager or the person that's in charge to assume and impose a narrative of consensus. Like, it could be convenient for me to sort of say, these are the things that we agreed on as a class. Any questions? Is that all clear? Good, let's move on. Right? But if you want to do this properly, authentically, then you need to make space for questions and comments and feedback. So that summary that I gave you, question you might ask, or I might ask, is there anything anyone would like to add? Was there anything missing? And you need to create safety for disagreement, because if you're the one that has power in the situation, other people might be afraid of inconveniencing you, they might be afraid of saying you're wrong because they might think you'll somehow think less of them or even retaliate. So they might want to be good little boys and girls and be like, yes, that's what happened and that's what we agreed, okay with. So to run against that tendency, question you might ask is, who disagrees? Not even does anyone disagree, because then they'll all say no. Right? Who disagrees is a much more obvious invitation to dissent. And if there is dissent, and you have to talk about that and work that out, you need time for that. Okay? I couldn't sort of do that in this class if I had 75 slides together. So I have to be like, moving on. As you were saying, certain participants need even more time than what you might be willing to give. So if somebody has cognitive disability, let's say they have an issue with focus or concentration, right, or maybe with hearing, then they need more time. Okay? Some folks speak English as an additional language. It's not their first language. They might be speaking really fast for them. They might need a little extra time to process that, then decide what they're going to say and like translate that back out of Chinese. They need more time. Some people are introverted. It takes them a minute to find their confidence before they speak. We can't sort of assume that everyone is like a able-bodied first language speaker that's an extrovert and has, you know, a disagreeable personality where they're ready to challenge. So you think you left this much time for the activity, maybe you really need this much time. And when you start thinking about who's in the audience and what their needs are, you need that much time. So you see how sort of time-consuming it is to do things that are engaging and then also authentically engaging and not just performatively engaging. And sometimes people just think of something later. So if you realize something after class, well then, is there a way that you can submit that? So just because you created a little space for something and you try to do it well doesn't mean that it worked for everybody. So, back to this, with this idea of the psychological contract for the class, you gave me expectations that were quite sort of course specific. They were specific for this as an OD class. You're interested in management skills, for instance. But can we step back, and I'd like to know what, from a student perspective, are your general expectations for a teacher? Like normal expectations for somebody who's teaching a class. Like what should they be doing? What kind of behaviors should you see? Yes?
Empathetical.
For a teacher. So they should care, kind of be empathetic and caring. And in fact, when recruiters from this university go to the Caribbean islands, they will kind of tell a story about the university that's somewhere that people will really care about you as an individual. What are some, can you give me examples of sort of specific behaviors that you would expect from a teacher? Just a moment, I have to mute something. I'm getting some feedback. So think about, for a second, think about specific behaviors, like should they answer, like emails, things that you go in a job description, while I just figure out the sound here. I fixed the sound. Really basic expectations. Super basic. Things that if I weren't doing, you'd be like, she's not doing her job. Yes?
Able to talk about the material and answer questions about it?
Yeah, okay, so able to talk about material sounds like maybe I should be lecturing. So, should I prepare a lecture, or just should I show up and do something? Do you expect that I spend any time preparing a lecture?
I think you should have an idea of what the outcomes of a time period are, whether that's lecturing or leading a discussion effectively. I think you should have an idea.
Sure. I think I missed something. I feel like you said something that I missed.
I said be able to answer questions about it.
Be able to answer questions. So answer questions. And when do students ask questions and how do they ask questions?
Throughout the lecture.
Yeah, so like when they raise hands, so like raised hands, and sometimes you might speak to me after class. Maybe you send an email. Do you expect your teachers to answer an email if you send it?
Yeah, unless they say otherwise.
Yeah, so answering email. Have you ever had anyone say, I do not answer student emails? Like flat out?
Yeah, I've had.
Really?
They've said, if your question is answered on the syllabus, I will not answer your email. which I think is quite reasonable, actually, because that's the student
Okay.
breaching their own expectations as a student. They should be reading it.
So I'm
Someone's-
hearing you say that you had an instructor say that they don't answer student emails if it's like a question that's in the syllabus.
Yeah.
They wouldn't even write back and say, it's in the syllabus. Just, no, okay. Not my style, but all right.
Aggressive.
Yeah.
But I get it.
Any other kind of, I don't know, super basic things? Office hours, that's a good one. Yeah. Have office hours. Maybe like if you wanted a meeting, you could have a meeting to talk about something.
Start a conversation with somebody if you can see they're struggling.
Okay, so sort of supporting student success.
Yeah.
So if they are, like, help if they're struggling, help the struggling student, or just ignore them and let them flounder.
Right. Yeah. With a clear definition of what it means to help, I think would be.
Sort of helping appropriately, like
Yeah.
within your role, like maybe you don't want that person to act like they're your clinical psychologist.
Right.
So in an appropriate, sort of ethical way, not like, here's some crystal meth that will make you feel better. An appropriate, ethical way.
Help the Germans for a little bit.
And am I missing anything? No? Okay. So we just talked about psychological contracts, which are these informal, flexible, unwritten expectations we have of each other, might be based on norms or, say, a personal context. And then that's different from a written contract like the syllabus. Now, I'm going to show you something. It's an instructor's contract. Please take a minute to read that. Hear you laughing.
Sorry. Is it
It's a little dense, so I'll give you guys a minute to read it. So according to this contract, what is my job? What things do I have to do?
arrange a bunch of stuff that doesn't really have anything to do with students learning.
Arrange a bunch of
The
stuff.
only thing in this entire
that doesn't-
contract that has anything to do with your students learning a thing is the word teach.
I really wish I could record your voice somehow because your points are teaching is kind of almost not there. So
Yeah.
what's number part A? So it means that if there is a textbook, there doesn't have to be, but if there is a textbook, I'll make sure you can somehow get it. Like it'll be at the bookstore. So I will arrange with the manager of the university bookstore or someone else, maybe the librarian, for any necessary textbook or teaching materials to be available at the start of the course. So you can all get the book. Yeah, good, okay, check. B, will submit the results of examinations to the registrar as required by the university. So there are some policies on that that's connected to, right? Within the time frame stipulated by Senate. So I can't post your grade next year. There is a rule. It's like if you don't have exams, that's 1 week after the start of the exam period. Right? There's some policy around that. So I have to submit your grades. And I will cooperate with the Senate office in the student evaluation process. And then I will fill in some form. It's like a one-page form where I might say identifies this or that.
It's interesting that you use the word cooperate.
Well, cooperate. Yeah, I want to get into that. What does that mean? Well, cooperate with the Senate office and the student evaluation process. So what is the student evaluation process?
It's very relevant for factors.
So I didn't hear you very well. It's
Where
because
students tell their evaluations between 1 to 5 of the professor for that semester.
yes, so it's where students evaluate the professor. There's a form for that, so you can see this notice gets posted on Brightspace, and you go click on that link, and there's a form of about like 25 questions, and there's as you said, there's a 1 to 5 scale, and off the top of my head, I remember one of them being like, is the person funny, or did they use humor to engage? 1 to 5. So it says, analysis of the data generated by student evaluations has a direct impact on quality of teaching, continuous improvement of course and program content, and is a consideration during promotion reviews. Your feedback is important to us. Students are encouraged to complete the online evaluation form as early as possible in the evaluation period. What does this set you up to expect? What do you believe from reading that?
That they'll take our feedback and possibly make the corrections to the course for the upcoming year.
So you believe that this feedback is being received, it's being analyzed, and it'll be used to make changes. That's not what feedback is for, right? So when I was first interested in teaching, my doctoral supervisor said, okay, teach a course once. Just do it once and do it well, right? So that, if they look at the evaluations, they know you can teach a class, but not more than once, because no academic hiring committee really cares. What matters is your research and your publications. In the time I've been here, no one's ever gone over my teaching evaluations with me. It does say somewhere in the collective agreement that it gets reviewed with the department chair every 3 years. It's been about 3 years since I've started teaching, so maybe that's still going to happen for me, but in the time that I've been here, no one's ever gone over them with me. And in fact, I haven't opened them. They're there, I care, I want to read them, but student feedback can sometimes be there's no training on how to give feedback. They don't understand that you're going to be reading them. They're sort of written to like a third party. And so I've read those and felt sort of gutted. So I want to read them, but I'm going to sit down with Trey Pad, he's going to read them for me, and then tell me what I need to know. That hasn't happened yet. Okay? There are 2 different faculty unions, and for the full-time faculty union, the administration is only allowed to look at results for 2 items. And they're not those qualitative things that you write up, right? Like, what did they do well and what do they need to improve? Those 2 qualitative, free-form responses, they don't see that. That just goes back to the prof. So they get to look at 2 items. I can't remember exactly which ones they are, but one of them is like, how do you rate this professor relative to the other ones? It's on that 1 to 5 scale, so there'll be something, they'll get an average score like 3.5 or 4 or 2, but we don't really know what that means and what to change based on that. So, what are you getting from this?
Well, the whole instructor evaluation is, effectively, it's framed as a communication tool for students to communicate feedback to the professors, and that's not
It's framed. I want to repeat that, what you said. Can you say that, and I'm going to repeat it back for
the instructor evaluations are framed as a method of communicating information from students, their feedback to the professor.
So the evaluations are framed as a tool for students to communicate feedback to the professor.
Yeah.
And anyone else? Is it just the professor alone?
Not sure.
Does it sound like it's going to other people? Does it sound like it's going to the administration, the powers that be?
Can't remember.
Just a private thing? Yeah, and I threw that question in, and I should let you finish what you were saying. So it's framed like it's this tool for students.
Yeah, well,
to
and I was going to say that in communication, there's sender and receiver.
Yes, there's sender and receiver.
Communication is not just sending a message. Communication is sending and receiving a message. So one of those things is not happening, basically.
Okay.
You know, so
You're saying that communication is about sending and receiving a message. The message is being sent, but questionable if and how it's being received. I agree with you, given that what is the function of this? What is the function of this in the organization? What is this accomplishing?
It's to allow the faculty and the institution to be responsive to the needs of its customers.
So you're saying that the function is for this to allow the institution to be responsive to the needs of the customers, to be responsive or to look responsive?
You want me to answer that?
I want you to answer that.
I think it's to look responsive.
You think it's to look responsive?
That's what I think it does.
I agree with you. I think it's performative. Now, some people,
I think it sits next to sort of the marketing imagery of somebody standing on pretty-looking campus with a textbook in their hand.
It's the marketing of
being
caring.
optimistic about their life.
Because you
they're gonna
expect
get a
caring,
university,
right?
So it's
And it looks like caring.
smoke and mirrors.
Smoke and mirrors. Okay, a lot of things that organizations do are performative. You know, I'm sorry to say that, but it's the real world. You want to know about the real world, right? Now, having said that, there are instructors who absolutely care and who care about feedback, invite feedback, and make changes, but that is not the way the system is designed. And you always have to know what the system is doing because that's going to predict most of the behavior, okay? So, let's see. So, my question now is, what would you expect an instructor to do if they're kind of a rational economic actor? So we know that my clicker keeps not working. You can see that the pay is about $5,000. Is that an hourly rate for number of hours? Is that a flat rate? So how is the reinforcement as payment working?
It's a stipend. It's a flat rate.
Yeah, so it's a flat rate. And what does that motivate the person receiving that to do? Work more hours for less pay or less hours for more pay?
Depends on how enthusiastic the teacher is, loving their job.
Yeah, so some
Yeah.
teachers are passionate and love their job, but you have to look at the system's perspective. What is the system setting up the person to do if they're a rational economic actor and they want to maximize profit for themselves?
More hours, less pay?
They want to work more hours to get less pay?
No, from the system perspective.
What do you think? Let's say there's a totally self-interested instructor. What are they going to do? What are they motivated to do? If they want to earn more money, not less.
Less hours, or figure it out for themselves.
Yeah, they want to work less hours, right? So does someone have a calculator? Let's figure out I don't have a calculator. My phone is there. So we've got 25, so let's just call that, you can call that $5,000. There'd be 4% vacation pay on that, so that's probably good enough. But we have 25 classes, and you kind of have to show up in lecture, otherwise like people would really complain. So you're definitely going to show up in lecture, and that's 75 minutes, 2 times a week, for a total of 25 classes. I want to know what the absolute minimum number of hours you can work for the highest amount of.
Sorry, 25 times 7, 1,800 hours. Is that right? 1,875. 75.
Maybe I'm bad at math.
75 times 25.
So 75 minutes and times twice a week, and then you have, let's say, 12 weeks.
Oh, 12. Yeah, okay, so 75 times 2 2 times 12 is 1,800 hours.
So 1,800 hours,
1,800 hours, yeah.
and say $5,000. What does that work to per hour?
5,000 divided by 1,800 is. No, I'm not doing this right. Something's awry here.
Okay, something's awry.
What am I doing?
Oh, did you divide something by 60?
Minutes. I'm good.
Yeah, minutes.
Minutes. Sorry. Jeez. 75. Shouldn't have asked me to do it. Times 12 weeks is 1,800. Well, okay, 30 hours. Sorry.
Okay, so it's
That's,
30 hours is like the minimum
5,000.
you can do. Wait, if you show up to lecture.
$166 an hour.
Just stop a moment, because you said 30 hours was a minute, but one instructor I know, he says that for every class he teaches 40 hours. So that means that he has 30 hours in class and then 10 hours for the other stuff like delivering exams
Okay.
and, right, so there's going to be some other stuff outside of lecture, like answering
1/3 of
emails.
whatever the classroom hours.
So I agree with you, but let's say the minimum,
40.
from what you've calculated, from what I know, is 40 hours. And we have pay of about $5,000. What does that work out per hour?
$125 an hour.
So $125 an hour. What does doing any other work, like preparing your lectures, answering questions, actually answering your emails, having office hours, having meetings, what does that do to the hourly rate?
Well, it depends on how you do those things.
So
Maybe nothing.
if the time increases, so if instead of 40 hours, we work 80 hours or 90 hours or 100 hours, what's happening to the hourly rate the person is being paid? It goes down. So is the system rewarding or reinforcing people for doing any of the things that the customer wants? Not at all. Interesting how that works, right? Now, what is the bare minimum? So if you,
But you can do some of those things. I would argue that you can probably do some of those things in a I guess economically productive way.
so you're saying you
such
can
that
kind
your
of
hourly rate wouldn't necessarily go down.
keep it down.
Yeah.
But anything more than the minimum, and the minimum you've seen is like very minimal. The contract is just give exams,
Yeah.
right? And what else? Get a textbook. So I want to talk about what the minimum is. So let me erase this. And so what is the bare minimum that an instructor can do if they want to keep their hourly rate as close to $125 an hour as possible? Let's say that they like that. They don't really want to be earning 60 or 40 or 30 or 5. So what is the bare minimum? So you have to give exams, right? There is a policy on exams, and students have to have like 15% of their final grade back by, the time that they drop, the drop deadline, okay? So you can't give one massive exam. The smallest amount you can do is 2. So the smallest amount of exams you can have is a midterm and a final. What is the easiest way to grade an exam?
Scantron.
Scantron. Multiple
Or-
choice.
Right space quiz, whatever.
Where do you get the questions from?
Testing.
Yeah, so they come with a textbook. All of those textbooks come with a test bank with multiple choice questions and the answers. And that's why students have subscriptions to things like Chegg, because they're all up there. Okay? And then they also come with like a little lecture guide that you could read, and with a slide deck. And this is an example of some of the slides from this course. And you can see that they're pretty minimal. There's usually no pictures or only pictures from the textbook. And honestly, I'd feel a little weird reading some of those. Like, change is a moving target. Today's managers need a new mindset. But there's a way that I could sort of stand here and just read that. Okay? So the bare minimum would be then using multiple choice from the test bank and then reading these slides. They're kind of minimal slides. Does this picture look like any kind of behavior that you recognize? in your instructors. No? I'm happy for you if not. Haven't been in that undergraduate class where somebody just didactically reads off a slide like that and then gives you 2 really high stakes exams. So, if they're doing more than that, it's not because the system is really rewarding them for that. And you might wonder, well, okay, if they get good student evaluations, do they get promoted or, right? And I'd say that a tenure committee might look at that, but it matters less than research. And for someone like me, getting a class, teaching a class is not based on my performance, it's based on seniority. Right? So there's a union, and the longer you're in it, the more you teach, the more of a thing called a precedent point you get. Okay? And the person that's on the top of the list is kind of the top pick. If you're not on the precedence list, then maybe you're not even going to be teaching. Okay? So performance isn't rewarded. It's like hanging in there for as long as you can. And if you're going to hang in there for a long time, maybe you want to increase profit to yourself. If you want to burn out doing all of these things. And these are things that the customer wants, but how is the system supporting or guiding or directing that? And what we might be seeing is that it isn't. Okay, with that, I will jump into what is an organization. So, an organization, actually let me ask you that question. What is an organization?
A social invention of people with the workplace coming together to share the same goal.
Okay, so you said it's a social invention of people in the workplace coming together to share the same goal, and I'm going to say that's very, very, very close. That's actually pretty great. The only thing I'd say you have in there is that it's like a workplace. An organization does not have to be a workplace. It may or may not be. So it's an entity. It has existence. It is a thing that exists, comprising of one or more people. So if you just be one person, you can be a sole proprietorship. Okay, it has a particular purpose. And that point about purpose is important. So the Greek root of the word organization is organon, right, which means a tool or an instrument, and you hear it in the word organ, like a musical organ. So, is an anarchist commune an organization?
Yeah.
Yes, it's a thing. It exists. Maybe it's not registered because they're anarchists and they don't care about registering things. But there's at least one person, and there's a purpose to live as anarchists. So yes, an anarchist commune is an organization. But when we talk about organizations, and the way that your book talks about it, it'll be like the Grayson Chemical Company. It's the idea that it's a kind of white-collar office space full of people that wear suits and are professional cast. It's in a glass tower downtown. There's an HR department, and formal policies and processes and positions that are all well-defined and spelled out and that we actually follow, and that your boss is someone like that. And it's the kind of thing we're seeing that they're making fun of on the office. In reality, some organizations are like that. And the reason we talk about those organizations in OD classes is because if you go out there in the world as an OD practitioner, that's who you're probably working for. But there's a lot more diversity to organizations than that. So yes, an anarchist commune is an organization. And so is a synagogue, and a daycare, and a small business, and a family, and a hospital, and a dentist's office, and a labor union, and a political party, and a government, and I can keep going. Okay, way more diversity than that. And it means different things to be a member of different organizations. Relationships within the organization are different, and your relationship to the organization is different. So a boss-employee relationship is not the same as a student-teacher relationship, or a parent-child relationship, or a doctor-patient relationship, okay? Or between the person in the coffee line and the barista. Okay? your relationship with your employer is not the same as your relationship with your church or your family or your volunteer societies. They come with different assumptions and different norms. So one big difference between your relationship with your family and your church or your volunteer organization and your employer is that there's this transactional relationship that's based on getting a job done, we're going to pay for it. If they can't pay you anymore, or they don't need you to do that work anymore, it's all over, right? So it's more conditional on tasks, maybe more transaction. But that's not all organizations, right? You can keep going to your church even if you don't donate to them. And maybe they want to be there for your whole life long, but your workplace might only be there for you until you retire, right? Different norms, different assumptions, and different kinds of relationships. A challenge for almost all organizations, maybe all, is that the modern environment's really dynamic. There's a lot of change out there in the world. There are many of us who can remember, including me, when the internet was just not a thing. Having a website was not a thing. You had like a Rolodex and a phone book and memos, okay? And because organizations are in continuous interaction with external forces, they need to be adaptable in order to survive. So organizations had to adapt to computers and the internet. If an organization didn't, then maybe it's not around anymore. So an organization is an entity that has an external environment, and there are many different stakeholders in there. So let's just think through this for SMU. So who are SMU's competitors? Dalhousie and Amount. And those are the ones that are just in town, but maybe you could go to Acadia or Santa Fax.
Or YouTube?
Yeah, you could go on YouTube. Maybe you don't need to learn this way from this class, okay? That's right. Yeah, YouTube is a competitor. If like you don't want to get like a sort of a credential, like sometimes you need a degree to be like, here, I meet the qualification of having a degree. But you could learn the same stuff that you learn in this room from a library, reading books on your own. And sure, in an economy of knowledge, those are big competitors. Who are the customers?
Students.
The customers are the students, yes. So for this institution, most of its revenue comes from student fees, and then there's the money you spend at the bookstore, and those really expensive coffees, and your food at Aramark, buying the t-shirts, and maybe donating as an alumnus.
Ticket sales to...
Ticket sales to the Huskies games, all of that. And then, well, yeah, there's also money from the government. Guess what? It's based on enrollment. Okay, so the bottom line is enrollment and then retention. So you could get like a whole bunch of students enrolling one year, but if you lose half of them, then that's an issue. Okay? So what governments are we subject to?
At least Nova Scotia.
At least,
Yeah. Both federal and provincial. And there'd be regulations, like they're supposed to comply with, say, the FOIA Compact. So if I send an email to anyone that's about you, has your name in it, you can ask me for that email, and legally I have to give it to you. In practice, when people have asked for their records, they might hear, sorry, that's confidential, it can't be disclosed to you, even though it's your personal information. But if you wanted to follow through on that, what are you going to do? Take it to court? Okay?
As a student.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, there is regulation and funding from the government. The funding is based on enrollment. Overall, there's pretty little accountability on the university. What I'm aware of is to be subject to Human Rights Commission. So if you say, what is the oversight on the university? So maybe that is not internal in any way, the external oversight, regulatory. So the Human Rights Commission, you can file a complaint with them. The ombudsman would probably have some role. If you filed a complaint with the Human Rights Commission, didn't go in your favor, maybe you could take that to the ombudsman. Then there's the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner. OIPC, so we have a FOIPOP officer. Who else are we subject to? So under the provincial government, it'd be labor and advanced education. This pen isn't working. I have to bring my own pens. Labor and advanced education.
Is that in your contract?
Sorry?
Is that in your contract?
No, bringing pens is not in
Okay.
my contract. Education. And under that, there's a post-secondary education portfolio. So you could complain to the minister. What else? Stockholders. Do we have stockholders? I mean, we don't sell shares in SMU. There is a board of governors.
I mean, there are stockholders indirectly involved in that there's.
We don't sell shares that are on like TSX, right?
Yeah, no,
shares
like,
in
like
SMU.
Tim Hortons and Starbucks, and you know they're stockholders in those companies that
Oh,
operate
you're
within
thinking
the
of
environment. but-
you're thinking of stakeholders, and that's different. So a company like
No, the stockholders of the public corporations that have units.
oh, interesting. So you're saying that there's stakeholders that are companies, and then they have their shareholders. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Not really SMU.
No, but it's things that matter in the external environment. And then suppliers. So if you're running a factory, the people that supply the raw materials to the factory would be the suppliers. And what would that mean in this context?
Maybe our books and
Yeah, the people who
merchandise,
supplies the books.
everything like this.
Yeah, instructors have relationships with textbook providers, and you think it's their territory, and they come chat you up. Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah, and then the people that make the t-shirts. And all of this furniture you see is supplied from somewhere, right? These whiteboards and right the chairs and tables and desks. And then how is society a stakeholder for SMU? What's our responsibility to society?
Educate the students to be bright young individuals, I think, into the real world.
Yes, educate the students to be bright, young, responsible individuals heading out into the real world. In fact, the university's definition of student success is like almost exactly that. To be global citizens.
I pulled that one.
Yes, to educate people. And we also have partnerships. So sometimes professors will partner with some kind of community organization and maybe do some community development work. And then employees and unions. Who are your employees?
You, professors.
Okay, so there's the faculty. You have two kinds of faculty. You have instructors, who are all members of QP 3912, and then you have people who have titles that are other than instructor. Maybe it's like lecturer or some kind of professor. So those are your full-time faculty. These guys are part-time. And they're members of a union called SMUFU. And both these unions have collective agreements with the university that are online that you can go read if you're interested. Okay? So 2 unions. And then are faculty the only people who work here?
Administrative.
There are administrators, yes. That's management.
IT.
Yeah, so those folks are called the staff. That's who I call when I can't get things working here. Classroom support, so that's like IT, classroom support. What else?
What's the difference between administrators and staff?
Oh, it's a big difference. This is management. That's your dean, your associate vice presidents, your vice presidents, president.
What about the people who work for them?
Sort of like the administrative assistant in the
Yeah.
dean's office is staff. So that would be your administrative. These folks are often faculty. So the dean has like let's say a professor who then gets like a 5-year term as dean, and then maybe they get a second 5-year term, but you've done it 10, and then after that they go back to being faculty. So administrators are typically, but not always, full-time faculty. will go back to being full-time faculty. And these are your managers, and they're not in the union. They'll be back in the union when they go back to being professors. But while they're the dean or the vice president, they're not in the union. This is management. And then staff is people like your administrative assistants, IT people, classroom support facilities, the people that clean the toilets. And I imagine that maybe some folks are contracted. So the people that work at Tim Hortons, I don't know if they work for Tim Hortons or they work for SMU. So there also are contractors in the environment. There are, I believe, at least 5 staff unions, and then there are non-unionized staff as well. Okay. So that's a lot to, keep track of. But these all matter to the university, right? If the faculty went on strike, you have a big problem, right? And same if the staff did. So, managers, the administrators, have to deal with like a chaotic world. Oh no, there's a pandemic, what are we gonna do now? Okay? And there's a lot of innovation out there, like YouTube. You can watch a lecture on YouTube. Why pay $1,500 to come here, right?
You could watch an entire Harvard course.
You can watch an
on-
entire
on
Harvard
YouTube,
course.
right?
Yeah. So, according to your textbook, managers, administrators need to be flexible. They need to be adaptable. What does that mean? What's adaptability?
Paying attention and willing to change.
Yeah, so
willing and able to change.
willing and able to change, and it's more than just change. Because we could change into doing something wrong or something stupid, right? It's the idea that the change is effective. So at the highest level, adaptability is using your resources in a way that achieves your goal. So it's not enough for something to be just a resource. You could have $5,000, that's a resource. If you go spend that on crystal meth, you're not doing yourself any favors in the long run. But if you got yourself a good education or got yourself a good car, then maybe you support your success in some legitimate way. So it's having the resource and using it skillfully to get what you want. It's like a 3-part thing. Okay? So managers need to know how to diagnose a problem, handle it in an adaptive way, and they might need some foresight to think about what might be coming so that we can be prepared. According to your textbook, I did not look into this to see if the book was right. Successful firms tend to be faster, they adapt quickly. They're conscious of the quality of their product, because if your product quality is poor, might not survive for very long. It's customer oriented, customer matters. Employees are engaged and involved. And they say smaller, and I want to qualify that by saying, well, there's some really big successful companies, but they tend to have, say, smaller and more adaptable units. So Walmart is not a small company, but if you were to look at what Walmart does, they have lots of different divisions, and the company could say, hey, maybe we should start a grocery department. And now they have. And maybe one day they'll be like, this isn't working out, we'll get rid of the grocery department. And then Walmart can survive by making changes to these units. But it's not like one big hunking monolith. That would be less adaptable.
Well,
Costco.
Costco is an example of a competitor that's arguably less adaptive than Walmart.
I think Costco's less adaptive.
I think they're slower to move.
Slow, and
Maybe not less adaptive, slower to adapt.
I wonder if
Their
maybe.
style is different. Their style and the way they adapt is much slower.
Okay.
Yeah, more conservative.
So this brings me to organizational development, which is about that change and doing it adaptively. So organizational development is about long-range efforts to build renewal processes into organizations. What are renewal processes? By that, they're referring to things you do to make the organization more adaptable. Okay? OD is managed from the top. It's planned. It reasonably affects the whole organization. If I do something in my class, like decide to start taping lectures, that's not OD for SMU. it's meant to increase the effectiveness and health of the organization. We talk about what that means, because organizational health is kind of vague. So keep that in mind. Effectiveness and health are fuzzy terms. And we use behavioral science knowledge that refers to psychology. The history of the discipline starts in the 1940s with the National Training Laboratory in Maine. It's no longer in Maine, but at the National Training Laboratory and the Survey Research Center at the University of Michigan were both sort of applied psychology labs. So the Survey Research Center did exactly what it sounds like. They studied surveys, research on surveys, how to use feedback from surveys. And then the NTL was about experience-based learning, and you'd have participants come together in small groups and kind of learn about group processes. So somebody might say something, and then everyone else would be like, this is what I felt when you said that. And then you learn about group dynamics. Okay, learn about feelings, reactions, perceptions. And they thought about, what are the different forms of organizations we can have? And they thought about culture. And they thought about being aware of social dynamics. So that's where the discipline started. And of course, it's evolved since then. OD itself as a discipline kind of has a culture. So OD is about planned change, but we value things like collaboration, okay? And we want to enhance performance. There is an emphasis on increased use of human potential. So there's this humanistic orientation where you want to help everyone be the best that they can be. That's a value orientation. We like to take a systems approach. So we had to step back from the university and look at it as a system with, well, you've got the employees and these groups, and then you have regulation and you have all these stakeholders. Okay, that's a systems approach. And then we want to use a scientific method. Okay? So what's the evidence this works? How can we see if it works? The primary goals of a change program is to make the organization more adaptive. They often target corporate culture, which we'll talk more about, and they aim to make the organization more competitive. So why do managers want OD? And I'm going to write this down because I know I'm going to change the slide. The top 3 reasons are 1, be more competitive, 2, survive. This is the pen that doesn't work. And 3, improve performance. This sounds like it came out of a qualitative analysis. What do you think of that? What are you getting from that? What do managers care about? Are those all very different or all very similar? Are all those completely different things?
Kind of all the same thing.
Yeah, they're kind of all the same thing. So maybe 60% of managers said they want to be more competitive, and 20 said they just want to survive outright. Those kind of mean the same things. You want to survive, and maybe you want to do even better than that. Maybe you want to excel, but it's all about performance. What does performance mean to a manager?
I think through the lens of kind of like the culture of competitive capitalism, they're about survival is competition, but survival doesn't have to be competition. Survival can be, and I'm sort of catching myself looking through my own lens and my own experience. Survival can be cooperation with all of the firms and not be competitive necessarily. So I've said they're all the same thing, but really that's my own frame.
If the organization survives, is it making a loss every year, or is it making a profit?
Depends on if the government's bailing them out.
Depends on whether the government's bailing them out. So they have to get the money from somewhere, maybe from selling something, maybe from government bailouts, but they kind of need to make money, right? They need to be profitable. They need to make at least nothing, but you can't do that for a long time. And then improving performance, what does that mean?
I mean, a university makes nothing forever. That's what they do. They don't make money. The government's.
No, yeah, so not all organizations are profit driven, but it's pretty important. And so performance for a university might be like, we have these great graduates that will release. And if you're a company that's making widgets, you might want to have the best widget ever. It's a really innovative, cool widgets. So it's kind of about the product. But do you see any tension between that and what you're trying to achieve as an OD practitioner?
The performance of the employees.
Yeah, not there at all. What else is different? Is the manager thinking at a systems level? Do they want science? Do they want to collaborate with their employees? It's about the health and wellness of the employee. Does it have a humanistic philosophy?
The top answers of the managers? No.
Your answer is no?
Yeah.
So off the bat, you have a tension between what you're trying to achieve as an OD practitioner who has these values. You care about the employees and you want them to be their best self, and at the end of the day, management has a bottom line to consider. So who does OD? So a specialist can be internal or external. So you can be an external consultant, you can be an internal practitioner. Internal practitioners are subject to internal politics. Who's in charge? It's usually management. What does management care about that? External practitioners, maybe they haven't drunk the Kool-Aid, they're not subject to the internal politics, but they have no power. They're like an advisor. The only way that an internal practitioner could have power is if you are the manager, if you are the president, and you want to do some OD. And then you have the power to make it happen. What are the typical things that practitioners do? Things like team development. So when someone comes in and takes you all rock climbing, that kind of stuff. The other things we'll talk about when they come up in later chapters: what's a learning organization? What is total quality management? What are boundaryless organizations? There's certain things that OD practitioners tend to do. We'll talk about that later. One of the common targets is changing culture. What is culture? Culture is it's a system of shared meanings. It's how we do things. It's the kind of language we use, the way we dress. If I showed up here in my pajamas or dressed as if I was going to go clubbing, you'd be like, what's going on with that? That would be kind of a violation of the culture. Certain ways that are appropriate to behave and certain ways that are considered inappropriate to behave. Certain values, right? Maybe I should value student success, right? But maybe some people have different values and they want to be like a tough taskmaster and make you jump through the hoops. Prove that you're good enough. So that could be a different value orientation. Might differ at different schools. So it's the level of norms and attitudes, okay? And culture is something that's hard for us to see because we just follow these scripts and we have these assumptions. We might not be aware that we have them, okay? So culture involves norms. Those are organized and shared ideas. There's a way of teaching a class that's a norm, and it's me kind of standing up here going blah, blah, blah to you. But there's some totally different way you could teach a class that would violate those norms. We can meet outside and sit in a circle. And you run the class, and I'll just sit and listen. That'd be different. But the norms are about, what you should do and how you should feel. There are pivotal norms and peripheral norms. You can't violate the pivotal norms without sacrificing the organization's objectives. So for a student, academic integrity is a pivotal norm, because if you didn't have that, what would your degree would be worth? And it's a pivotal norm that I know what I'm talking about. And it's a pivotal norm that I teach a class that's actually on the subject that it should be about, not ballroom dance. Right? There's norms that you can't break. If you're a greengrocer, you have to sell fresh food. Okay? If you're a doctor, you have to take care of your patient and not like kill them. Those are pivotal norms. And then there's peripheral norms that kind of support and maybe contribute to pivotal norms, but they're not essential. So if I showed up here dressed like I was going to a club, well, I kind of could do that. You might raise your eyebrow, but I get away with it. If an organization has a casual Friday, you know that dress is not a pivotal norm, because they would not let you dress down. Do investment bankers have casual Friday? Do funeral directors have casual Fridays? No, they don't let them do that. But the IT guys, okay, can have casual Friday. In that case, it's a peripheral norm. When you come into an organization, you encounter that culture. You come in with your expectations, and you may believe narratives the organization has about itself. And then you're like, oh my goodness, where am I and what's happening to me? Sometimes people encounter that shock, unless you're already socialized into it. So universities, kind of an upper middle class milieu, where students from upper middle class white backgrounds fit right in, but students from different environments, students from working class backgrounds, students who are international students, might feel like a fish out of water, because they're not used to a lot of things that folks who are socialized to the culture already kind of get. So that's shock after encountering it. And then you kind of, if you do get shocked, you come to learn, what's rewarded, what's punishment. You come to understand where power is. You come to understand the power games. And you get that through feedback of one kind or another. Sometimes it's unpleasant, but you will get feedback, and eventually you'll adjust. Okay? You might say, no, I hate this, I'm not accepting the norms, and that's rebellion. Or you might just accept all the values and norms, and that's conformity. And there's a place between rebellion and conformity. It's called creative individuals. So that's when you accept all the pivotal values. You're not going to cheat, you're not going to bring a gun to class, but maybe you'll dress in ways that express yourself, that maybe aren't what everyone else is wearing. Okay, so that's a kind of a middle place. When it says reject all others, I'll say, no, it's not all others. But you can be yourself with the peripheral norms. So OD is a continuing process, and because the environment continues to be dynamic. So you never stop OD if you're doing it well. You're going to have to keep adjusting. We want to see the organization as a total system. And what you see there is a socio-technical systems model, and we'll talk about that more. I'm aware that I'm running out of time, so I'm going to pick up the speed a little bit. Okay. We understand that the system has elements that are interrelated and that interact. So if the staff go on strike and classroom support isn't there to talk to me, how am I going to get your lecture slides up? Because I don't know what I'm doing. Get that idea? There are 5 stages of organizational development according to your textbook. Okay? And stage 1, someone recognizes a need for change. Somebody wants to change. You, the practitioner, enter the system, or maybe you're internal and you're already there. You establish trust and communication. Gather data to understand the problem. Identify the causes. You can then propose change strategies. Then you're going to implement some intervention. Use OD techniques that we'll learn about. You want to make things better. You'll monitor results. Eventually the change will happen, things will stabilize, and we can, either if you're an external consultant, leave the organization, or an internal practitioner, you might move on to something else. What hidden assumptions does that have? There's a lot of assumptions right there. It assumes that the desire for change is authentic, that we don't want to do something that's just performative. It assumes that people are trustworthy and act in good faith and are playing mind games with you. In fact, they do. It implies that we really want to monitor results in an accountable way, right? That we're going to be collecting any data at all. There are plenty of interventions that never collect data, never look at the results, okay? Many organizations want initiatives that give you this kind of picture for the newsletter, okay? What does this picture say? You saw that in the newsletter. Just take a moment. It is 6:45 and you are free to go. Since I'm recording, what I'm going to do is finish the lecture and send it out. So I'm going to finish the lecture now. You are free to go. I mean, you're always free to go. You're not my prisoners. But I'm going to wrap this up and then post the lecture and you can catch the end later. So for those of you who do want to stay, what is this? What does that say? If you saw that on your company newsletter.
Diverse and inclusive.
Yeah, diversity and inclusion. And then if an organization is diverse and inclusive, how would you really know? How would you know if that's true?
I think you have to experience it to make enough observations to see whether or not that's true, over a period of time and company-wide, as opposed to, just in past performance.
So you're really going to observe. What else could you do? I think that's good. I think there's more you could do. You could ask them, right? You could ask people, do you really feel included? Okay. Things that I notice there. We'll talk about power games and expressions of dominance and submission. Touching somebody, entering their space is a dominant behavior. Who is being touched in that picture?
The second from the left.
Second from the left.
It's being.
Yeah.
She has her arm.
So the white
She's
person's
the
touching.
boss.
The white person's touching the black person. Who else is getting touched?
The person in the wheelchair, their wheelchair is their space, so their
Yeah.
wheelchair's being touched.
And the wheelchair's being touched.
Yeah.
So right from that picture, it's not proof. I'm getting a sense
That's
that there
not an
might be
armrest.
some. Sorry?
That's not an armrest, I'm saying.
Yeah, somebody's wheelchair is not an armrest. Yeah, that's very good. So about touch being done. Once I was talking to a student after class, and the student was a black lady in her 40s. And we're having a conversation about the course material. I might have been a teaching assistant then. It was a few years ago now. And there was another student there, like everyone else had left the room, okay? And this one student had stayed. And she was staring at the student I was talking to, like fascinated. She was fascinated. And so while I'm talking, she walks up, this other student, and she says, "Oh, I'm sorry, your hair, I've never seen," and she starts touching her hair, like her hands right in the hair, just kind of like crunching it. And can you imagine what that's like for the person that's having their hair nobody in my entire life here has ever come up and touched my hair, even though it could be legitimately interesting. Right? Touch is an intrusive, dominant thing. So sometimes, if your boss might come in and pat you on the shoulder and say, "Good job," or initiate the handshake. Okay? So you look at who's being touched. You see it right in the picture. Now these are just little things, little red flags that you look for, right? There's have you guys seen Cloud9 Superstore? Yeah, it's on Netflix. It's quite funny. And have you seen this? Anyone seen this episode? So in this episode, a journalist for the company newsletter, which is called Straightest Magazine, is coming, and the employee there in the wheelchair, I can't remember his name, is running because he knows that they're coming for him. They want to get a picture of him. Why do we want a picture of the guy in the wheelchair? Do we want to take a picture of the guy with the invisible disability?
Doesn't sell as well, does it?
Doesn't sell as well. Okay? So what I'm trying to communicate here is that you, as somebody that wants to be an OD practitioner, have these humanistic values, but you might be encountering a management culture that is more about this, and that might be interested not in real change, but performative change. Okay? Now, that sounds kind of depressing, but things are changing, and things have changed. There was a time when men, in particular those in power, could pretty much decide that a woman working there was his girlfriend, right? That was a thing. Like, the term sexual harassment was coined in 1975. Like, there was a time you could smoke a drink at work. There was a time when students smoked in classrooms. We don't do that anymore. So change does happen, but I don't want you to start off from a really idealistic place. Power matters. This is the last paragraph in the chapter, and it's so important that I'm going to read it, highlighted in every color. One important issue in the implementation of an OD program is whether or not the practitioner is able to effectively deal with power and the use of power. Hierarchical organizations, whether they be business, governmental, for-profit, or not-for-profit, even your not-for-profit organizations, rely on power. The individuals in positions of influence generally constitute the power structure, and frequently are power-motivated people. Okay? People who go for these kind of managerial jobs often like and want power and use power. So you need to understand that. Managers compete for promotions, and departments and divisions have disagreement over budget allocations. There's internal jockeying for power. Political infighting is a reality and a dysfunctional factor in most organizations. Okay, when I say politics, I have ganging up, cliques, that kind of thing, backstabbing, rumor spreading, undermining. Counterproductive work behavior probably fall under that definition. Anyway, and the issue is whether OD practitioners deal with these power issues and bringing about change. You can't be blind to it. In a study of high-speed decision-making, Kathleen Eisenhart and L.J. Bourgeois found that politics influence decisions and that political conflicts within top management teams are associated with poor firm performance. So there's a dark side and a shadow side and a dysfunctional side. You need to know about it. The OD practitioner acts as a facilitator to promote team problem solving and collaboration, and encourages such values as trust, openness, and consensus. So you are trying to move in a less dysfunctional direction, right? So trust and openness can't happen in a dysfunctional, scary, toxic environment. But that's what you're going into in many cases. Given the nature of an OD program, it's our view that OD is not a political power type of intervention, and I agree. Unless you're the manager with the power and you're trying to do some OD. But most of the time, you as an internal and external practitioner either don't have power or are subject to politics. So you need to be aware of it. Given the political nature of organizational decision-making, the OD practitioner must be aware of politics and use a problem-solving approach that is compatible with the power-oriented situation, is compatible with the power dynamics and the environment. So you want to learn management skills, from the most important you'll get is just seeing and understanding power, recognizing power dynamics, reading a room for power dynamics. Look around this room. Who's empowered? Me. I'm standing. You're sitting. Okay, I'm doing all the talking. I have all the airtime. How much do you have? How free do you feel to argue with me? Are you a little afraid that I might give you a low grade? And then, so that's within the room, but then you could look at this culture as a whole. Look at all the classrooms. Look, walk through the parking lot. Are there some people that have reserved parking spaces? Yeah, faculty. There's no reserved parking spaces for staff. What does that tell you about the faculty-staff relationship? Right? Who has shared offices? Who has private offices? Who has the swanky, fancy offices and the assistants? Those are people who have more power. I want you to be able to recognize dominance and submission in body language, for instance, in yourself, in others, in structures, and in systems. And then I also want you to be able to see what equality looks like and to know some ways to promote it. Thank you. I'm sorry I went 10 minutes overtime there. For next class, please read, I asked you to consider reading Chapter 2 on organizational renewal